What I'm going to tell you is all but one in the Ramban, Nachmanides commentary in a couple of places. I added one little element of my own. You'll see. I think it's pretty obviously right, but I'm just saying that. So, okay. Look on page 1063, the very bottom of the page, verse 5. When brothers dwell together, and one of them dies, and he has no child, the wife of the deceased shall not marry outside to a strange man. Her brother-in-law shall come to her and take her to himself as a wife and perform. Now, between you and me, I haven't got a clue what a levirate is. The word in Hebrew is Yibbum, and that's the word they're going to use. Perform Yibbum, which is a type of marriage. It shall be that the firstborn, if she can bear, shall, now the literal Hebrew is, rise up on the name of his dead brother, so that his name shall not be blotted out from Israel. I'm not interested in all the details, the other ways to get out of it and everything else. I'm interested in one thing. The picture here is, Reuben and Shimon are brothers. Reuben is married to Sarah. Reuben has no children, not from Sarah nor from anybody else. He's childless. He dies. Shimon should take Sarah to wife to try to have a son. And if they will have a son, I'm just stating what we read in very simplistic terms, then the name of that son should be Reuven, called after the dead brother, so that the name of the dead brother should not be blotted out from Israel. Yeah.
What happens if the brother-in-law's already married?
Okay. There's endless details here. I'm not going into that now. I'm focusing on one. And you weren't here when I started. I'm talking about reincarnation now. So there's endless details here and all sorts of explanations, and I'm not doing that. It would take 2 or 3 weeks just to get through these 2 verses. I can't do that. Yeah.
Firstborn automatically means a male.
Well, we're talking about taking the name of the dead brother. If it's a female, she's not going to take the name of the dead brother. Okay. I mean, that's true. I have a cousin named Davida. And because I'm so bad at languages and I'm not aware of these things, it took me decades to figure out that that's a feminization of David. But there's no such thing in ancient Israel. Okay. Now, the Ramban points out there is no such mitzvah to call the name of the newborn boy by the name of the deceased brother. There is no such mitzvah. It's not mentioned in the oral tradition anywhere. It's not carried out anywhere. So, if that's not what the verse is talking about, then we need to know what it is talking about. That's what it sounded like. Furthermore, the Maharal points out that the phraseology here is absolutely unique, and it is not how the Tanakh describes giving a name. The Tanakh describes giving a name with the verb yikareh, he shall be called. That's not what it says here. It says he shall arise, yakum, get up, stand up on the name of his dead brother. That's absolutely unique. You don't find that anywhere else. So even the phraseology here would cause us some wonder as to exactly what's being referred to. Okay? That's the first piece of evidence. Now, if you take a look at the book of Ruth, on page 1272, Ruth was married to a fellow named Machlon, and Machlon died. And Ruth and her mother-in-law came back to Israel from Moab, and now Elimelech, who is a relative of Machlon, is taking an interest in getting Ruth settled in various ways. In particular, is proposing to take her as wife. He's speaking to the elders of the city because there's certain financial negotiations as well. Here's verse 9, 3/4 of the way down the page. Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witness this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech, who was Chilion's of Machlon's from Nomi, the fields and property. And what is more, I've also acquired Ruth the Moabite, wife of Machlon, as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the deceased on his inheritance, that the name of the deceased not be cut off from among his brethren, from the grave of his place. That's a pretty clear paraphrase of what we read in the previous passage, where it talks about Yibbum. The name should remain. The name should not be lost. Right? Okay, now, what's the name of Ruth's husband who died?
Elimelech? No.
That was his father,
Yeah.
Machlon. Machlon. So, if Boaz and Ruth succeed in having a child, he should be called Machlon, after the name of the dead father, dead husband, who didn't have any children. Well, they in fact do succeed in having a child, 13. And so Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife, came to her, Hashem let her conceive, and she bore a son. And the woman said to Naomi, blessed be Hashem, who has not left you without a redeemer today. May his name be famous in Israel. He will become your life's restorer, sustain your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you has borne him, better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child, held it to her bosom, and she became its nurse. The neighborhood woman gave him the name, saying, a son is born to Naomi. Let's figure this out. Naomi was Elimelech's wife. Naomi's the mother of Machlon and his brother Kilion. Ruth married Machlon. So now how are Ruth and Naomi related?
In-laws?
Daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. Now, when the husband dies, how are they related?
They are.
They are. I mean, former daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. But there's nothing left, right? Now, Ruth bears a child. Why would anybody say that a child is born to Naomi? You could say it's poetry, and you could say it's spiritual, you could say, but it's a little bit of a stretch since there's no relationship, no familial relationship here at all. It's not as if Naomi would be the grandmother of the child, and then you could say, or at least on the surface. Okay, so that phraseology is peculiar. And then they gave him a name. They named him Oved. Father of Yishai, father of David. Oved. Not Machlon. Not Machlon. Then he called him Machlon. He called him Oved. The previous page, Boaz quotes or paraphrases the description of what's written with respect to Yibbum, that the name should not be lost, the name should not be cut off. But when it comes to naming the son, they don't name him Machlon. They name him Oved. So Ramban points out, citing this passage, that there's no rule to give the newborn son any name at all. You can give him any name you want. Which again will force us to understand what it means that the name shouldn't be cut off, the name shouldn't be lost, because the same phraseology is quoted here in the book of Ruth. Really good so far? Okay, now I want to add something which the Ramban doesn't mention, but I think it at least contributes to understanding the idea.
I have a quick question just for clarification. I thought your name is passed down as it becomes your descendant's last name, like Ben, what's his name, like Ben Abraham or whatever. Not you don't take the first name of the father.
You can have. Let's put it this way. First of all, in the Sephardi world, they do name even for living parents. So you'll have Yaakov ben Yaakov. That's perfectly all right. In the Ashkenazi world, you usually wait until the person dies to name for him. So it's often the case that a grandson is named for a grandfather. And that's the first name, the same first name. Yeah.
Jumping on what he said, let's say the person who died's name is Abraham, and the brother's name is Yaakov. And so instead of having the child's name be Oved ben Yaakov, it would be Oved ben Avraham.
That won't help.
No?
That won't help. No, that's not his name.
Oh.
That's a way of identifying by previous generations. Okay, so now, look at page 887. The Jewish people are about to go into the land of Israel, and they're about to take possession. And the way the possession worked is roughly like this. Those who left Egypt were assigned portions of the land. They all died in the wilderness, all the ones over the age of 20. And the ones who actually go in take possession of what was assigned to their parents. That's roughly how it went. Now, there was a fellow named Zelophehad who died in the wilderness and whose descendants want to clarify their status with respect to inheriting the land that should have gone to him. So, beginning of chapter 27, top of the page. The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Chaver, son of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Menashe, the family of Menashe, son of Joseph, drew near. These are their names. Okay, I'm not going to read it. And they stood before Moses, before Elazar the Kohen, the leaders of the entire assembly, the entrance of the tent of meeting, saying, they're now presenting an argument for which the oral tradition praises them in the highest possible terms. They're wise, they're clever, they're smart, they're well-educated, they express themselves clearly, they're imaginative. And even God says of them, they have spoken correctly in the text. Let's hear their argument. Our father died in the wilderness. That's Zelophehad. But he was not among the assembly that gathered against Hashem in the assembly of Korach, which might then brand him as a super criminal, and which might then deprive him of any rights, and then, by implication, we wouldn't have any rights to make any claims. He died of his own sin, and he had no son. Meaning, if he had a son, there'd be nothing to talk about. We wouldn't have appeared here. But he had no son. So that raises a problem. What's the problem? Why should the name of our father be omitted from among his family because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. Meaning, Chefer, their grandfather, is the one who left Egypt. A portion of land was assigned to Chefer. He died. That land should go to his children. And he had a number of children. One of his children also died. And that child had descendants. Now, as abstractly, two options. Land goes to descendants. Not to descendants. One generation down. Zelophehad's gone. He's gone. Too bad. His portion will be absorbed by the other brothers and lost. Or no. Zelophehad died. His descendants should step into his slot and pick up that piece of land that would have gone to Zelophehad. So the girls say, if our father had a son, you know, we know, everyone knows, that the son would have stepped into Zelophehad's slot and picked up his piece of land. That's agreed upon. But now, he has no sons. He only has us, 5 daughters. Let not our father's name, Zelophehad, be omitted from among his family, because he had no son. Give us a possession among our father's brothers. Now, if I read that literally, simply, baldly, which is my custom, that's the way I like to read things, it sounds like theater of the absurd. Ladies, you don't want your father's name to be lost? When you have children, call them Zelophehad. You can have a passel of Zelophehad's, at least 5. What's the problem? You worry about his name? When great people die, 5 years later, it's a big problem in the kindergartens. But you get a group of 25 kids, 16 of whom have the same name, the name of the great person who died. What is their problem? How can they say we don't want our father's name to be omitted, therefore give us land? Is it beginning to seem like the word name here does more than just signify how you're called to dinner? You know, Philip, it's time for dinner. Here, if you read it as name, the way you're called, the passage is just bizarre. It's bizarre. Clearly what they're saying is, if he had a son, his son would stand in for the father, somehow. Doesn't have a son, so now, this is the proposition that they're putting to Moses and the assembly. This is where the Talmud fills it out. You have to make a decision. Do we as daughters stand in for our father or don't we? If we stand in for our father, then give us the piece of land that was assigned to him, just as if he had a son. If we don't stand in for our father, then you have to have the principle of Yibbum apply to our mother, that she should marry one of the brothers and have a shot at producing someone who will stand in for him. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say, look, your father had children, so there's no Yibbum. But on the other hand, the children he has don't stand in for him, so they don't get the land. You can't have it both ways. That's a contradiction. The Talmud says their argument is correct, successful. God confirms them by saying, look at the next verse 6, the daughters of Zelophehad spoke properly. And by the way, you know what the resolution of this is? It's maybe a surprise to some people and would be worthy of being discussed in certain types of political classes. Daughters do stand in for the father. They do stand in for the father and they get the land. Whatever you want to make out of the idea that daughters can stand in for a father, okay. Okay, fine. So here we're talking about the name. We're talking about somebody who can stand in for the father. Maybe that's what it means in Yibbum, the first passage that we saw, when it says, arise on the name of the dead brother. It means he's going to stand in for that dead brother. He's going to stand in for the identity of that dead brother. Indeed, as the Maharal, who I told you, comments on the phraseology, says, look at it in terms of the historical root of this reality. Reuven married Sarah. Reuven had no children and died. So then, Shimon stepped in, and he married Sarah, and Sarah had a child. Why is that child in the world? What's he doing there? Well, it's the product of Shimon and Sarah. That's true. He's a product of Shimon and Sarah, but how did Shimon get there? Shimon got there because his brother Reuven was married to Sarah and died without a child. So really the marriage of Reuven and Sarah is the root of this child's existence. And that's why the Torah uses the phraseology, he should arise on the name. Now the word name means something like on the identity of the dead brother, because he's there because of that dead brother. Are we getting it so far? Okay, now there is in fact another passage in the Torah that talks about Yibbum, by name.
Just 1 second. Here, how does the 5 daughters getting the land help to create a name for their father?
It doesn't. Again, the word name now means someone to stand in the father's place. Let's go through the argument again, right? If he had a son, no questions would have been raised. Why not? Because the son would have stepped into the father's place and taken the land. He would have been
the
a...
daughters are stepping into the father's place now.
That's it. That's it.
Does that mean the daughters are now taking his name? Or raising his name?
Yeah. In other words, what's happened now is NAME no longer describes how you're called to supper. NAME, or Shem in Hebrew, at least in these passages, indicates a person's identity. It has nothing to do with the way you write down as something in the telephone book. It's lost that connection. Now, in the book of Genesis, there is a story about Yibbum. Take a look at page 209. Top of the page. It was that time that Judah went down from his brothers, turned away towards an Adullamite man whose name was Hira. Saw the daughter of a prominent merchant whose name was Shua, married her and consorted with her. She conceived, bore him a son, called his name Er. Conceived again and bore him another son, named Onan. Third son, Shelah. Judah took a wife for Er's firstborn. Her name was Tamar. Judah's firstborn, was evil in the eyes of Hashem. Hashem caused him to die. Then Judah said to Onan, consort with your brother's wife and do Yibbum. The word Yibbum is in the text, same word as it is in Deuteronomy. And establish offspring for your brother. That phraseology is different from what you had in Deuteronomy, where we read about Yibbum. And it's, I'm not indicating there's any tension or contradiction between them, but it emphasizes a different point. Establish offspring for your brother. Now, the word for offspring in the Hebrew, zera, is a word for biological continuity. It's a very strong word. In literal terms, I would say, linguistically, what he's saying is impossible. You can't be your brother's biological self, but that's what he says. Onan knew that the seed would not be his. It's the same Hebrew word, seed. So it was that whenever he would consort with his brother's wife, he would let her go to waste on the ground, so as not to provide offspring for his brother. This is, curiouser and curiouser, said Alice. What do you mean? He's having relations with this woman. He knew the seed wouldn't be his. Of course the seed is his. The DNA is his. The genes are his genes. I mean, the seed won't be his. Furthermore, points out the Ramban, when it says Onan knew the seed would not be his, it sounds like he knew something that other people didn't know. Sounds something special about him. He knew a secret that other people didn't know. Otherwise, it simply should have said, since the seed wouldn't be his, Onan spilled it on the ground. But no, he knew. So first of all, you have a statement which in literal terms can't be true. Of course the seed is his. And second of all, there's some secret here that's not common knowledge. Studying the biology textbooks won't get you this. And Onan knew it, that it wouldn't be his. And therefore he didn't want to do this. Doesn't it sound like if he goes through with this, somehow, he's dislocated as the father of the child, and the father of the child is the dead brother. It becomes a child of the dead brother. Biology, schmiology. Don't give a hoot about the sperm. But it's not his. And he says, I'm going to invest in having a child, raising a child, caring for a child. Not if it's not mine. Not if it's not mine. Genes or no genes. It's not mine, not interested. Okay. 10, what he did was evil in the eyes of Hashem, and he caused him to die also. Bang. Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remaining near her father's house until my son Jael grows up, for he thought, lest he die like his brothers. It's the third brother. It's his turn. Judah's afraid. And he says, he's not old enough yet, but he's pushing her off. He doesn't intend to give her to him, give him to her. Not interested. Tamar went and lived at her father's house. Many days passed. She was daughter of the wife of Judah, died. They're all dying. This is a very failed, in a certain sense, failed investment in Judah's part. We'll see, it's not 100%. His wife dies. He's consoled, went up to go shear his sheep, he and his friend. Tamar was told as follows, behold, your father-in-law is coming up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she engineers to have relations with her father-in-law. Well, former father-in-law. Right now she's not married to any of his children. She engineers to have relations with him. Okay, she disguises herself and pretends to be a prostitute. Okay. And he is deceived. And she becomes pregnant. Next page. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law has committed harlotry. Behold, she is conceived by harlotry. She had illicit relations. There's no question because she's pregnant. He says she should be executed. It's a long, complicated story why that's so and what it means. I'm not going into that. It's not relevant to me. She says she had taken something from him when they had relations. She sends it to him and says, identify, if you please, to whom this belongs. He says, she's right, it's from me. I'm guilty. 27, came to pass that time she gave birth. Behold, there were twins in her womb. Why do you think she gives birth to twins?
Because two husbands.
Because there are two dead husbands that have to be replaced. That's why. I read that in the Ramban. I almost fell off my chair. That's pretty dramatic. He said do Yibbum twice. He said Yibbum once. Right? Now, he's been tricked into playing the role of Yibbum, Judah. She disguised herself and tricked him into the role of playing that, of doing Yibbum. I'll explain the family relations in Yibbum in a minute. The Ramban explains that as well. And since there are two dead husbands that have to be replaced, she gives birth to twins. Further confirmation for this, the Ramban finds in the following very interesting fact. Throughout the Torah, there are genealogies. And some of them trace back all the way to Jacob and his children and the descendants, starting from there. These are genealogies of the Jews, let's say, in the wilderness. 400 years later, 250 years later, whatever it is. In every genealogy, when it starts with Judah, it says, Judah gave birth to Er and Onan and Shelah in the land of Canaan, and Er and Onan died, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're doing a genealogy. Er and Onan died without offspring. What do you need them for? They don't play any role in a genealogy. No one alive now whose ancestry you're tracing comes from them. Answer is, they do play a role in the genealogy because they were replaced by these twins. They're still there. They got another chance.
So they were reincarnation.
Oh, so now, those are the facts. There's one word that explains all these facts with no residue, and that word is reincarnation. What we're talking about here is reincarnation. Let's see. The first one, we're talking about the institution of Yibbum. In the institution of Yibbum, you're telling Shimon, when he marries Reuven's widow, if you have a child, that child will arise on the name of Reuven. He will replace Reuven in the world because he will be carrying Reuven's soul. Nothing to do with the name you put in the telephone book. Ruth and Boaz have a child. They have a child so that Machlon's so-called name won't be blotted out from the Jewish people. And the women in the community say, a child is born to Nomi. Nomi? Nomi who? Nomi and Ruth aren't related at all. They used to be mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. But now that Nomi's not married to her son anymore, they're not married at all. Yes, but this child carries Machlon's soul. And Machlon was Nomi's child. So it's Machlon again. So it is Nomi's child, literally. Comes out literally true. And of course they don't call him Machlon. The issue is not what you call him. The issue is whose soul he's carrying. And by the way, one of the commentators say, look at the dedication of Ruth. Machlon died because he was wicked, because he was evil. And Ruth went through this in order to provide a rehabilitation for the soul of her first husband who was wicked. And it wasn't trivial because Boaz was aged when they got married, and he lasted 12 hours. 12 hours. So marriage, they had relations, in the morning he was dead. So the source praises her for her dedication. That's what she did in order to give a chance for her death. Okay. Now the daughters of Zelophehad. Our father died. If he has a son, the son is his continuation. He continues his identity. That needs to be explained. I'll come back. There are a couple of logical questions I have to answer. Right? And nobody doubts that. And therefore, if he had a son, he would step in and get the land that belonged to him. He didn't have a son. Decide, do we as daughters carry his identity? If we do, give us the land. If we don't, let our mother do Yibbum to try to produce another son who will carry his identity, will carry his soul, so that he can stand in for his father. You can't have it both ways. That we are children, so she can't do Yibbum, but as daughters, we don't carry our father's identity. We can't do that. Just 1 second. And then when you come to Aaron Onan, so she becomes pregnant from Yehuda, and she gives birth to twins because those you need to replace 2 dead husbands. And as I said, in genealogies, Aaron and Onan are always mentioned because Peretz and Zorach were the names of the 2 children that she gives birth to. They are carrying the souls of Aaron and Onan, and therefore Aaron and Onan really do play a role in the genealogy of the Jewish people. Now, there are 2 questions that I have to answer. Let me answer those, and then we can discuss it as you like. One question is, according to the first passage that we saw, the relative who does Yibbum is a brother. In the case of Boaz, he was some kind of a distant cousin. And in the case of Yehuda, it was the former father-in-law. In neither case was it a brother. So the Ramban discusses this. The Ramban says like this. The function of Yibbum is to provide a substitute body to house the soul of the man who left the world without children. The closer the relationship of those who produce the body to the deceased, the better. The trouble is, close relationships are forbidden by law. Such marriages are forbidden. So the Torah made one exception by choosing, it's very interesting the Ramban says this, choosing the closest possible relationship, a brother, not a father, not a son, not a cousin, not an uncle, but a brother. You very well know, in genetic terms, that's your closest, genetically, your closest relative is a sibling. And if you're a man, that is a brother. And made that the one exception to the circle of close family relationships which are forbidden. Someone else who is a further removed family relation also can play a role in producing an appropriate vehicle for that lost soul. It can do. It's not ideal, but it certainly can do. It certainly can fulfill the same function. That's why Boaz, I mean, this is proved in the case of Boaz, because Boaz uses the vocabulary of Yibbum, even though he's not a brother. He uses that vocabulary. So he's saying so. Even though I'm a cousin, I can do something that will maintain Machlon's identity in the world. And so the same thing is true with Yehuda.
Isn't he
Well,
forbidden?
just 1 second. Let me just finish this. One other logical question here, and that is this. The picture that we're giving, there are 2 pictures running along side by side, and it's not clear exactly how they fit. One picture is a fellow who dies without children. His wife does Yibbum with a brother, and they have a child to pick up that soul. That soul sort of floating, didn't have any children, to pick up that soul. But if he had children, that wouldn't be necessary. Why exactly wouldn't it be necessary? Let's say Reuven has 16 children. Still, he is he himself, and the children are they themselves. When he dies, isn't his soul then floating? It's floating because he died and he left the world. What difference does it make that he has children? There are a few ways to answer this, but the most, I think, direct way is to say that children are so closely related to the parent that when he dies, elements of the parent's soul automatically go over to the children, so he is represented in the world. They automatically represent him in the world. It's only when the deceased has no children, then there's no place for his soul to go automatically. Then the attempt is to create another vehicle which is close to him in familial terms as possible, so as to create something that's relevant to carry his soul. That's why if he has children, there's no need for Yibbum, but if he doesn't have children, then Yibbum is the way to rectify the problem. And of course, if let's imagine a person has no children, and no Yibbum is possible, doesn't have any brothers or something else, he's not lost, God will do it in other ways. This is just a way of doing it in ideal terms. Okay, questions now. Yeah.
Why does it necessarily have to be, you sort of answered this, but I'll ask it anyways. Why does it necessarily have to be relative? Could it, a non-relative, provide the possibility of a secondary soul if this is a entirely spiritual concept?
Yes, that's why I said it's only a way of making it more ideal, but it is not. In fact, the Zohar discusses this in a very sort of poignant way. You're talking about giving a soul another chance, right? Well, maybe the soul doesn't need another chance. Maybe the soul's really finished. It's done everything it has to do. It's already ideal. But we don't know that. The law is he died without children. He has a brother. So the brother, right, and they have a child. So what's going on there? Says the Zohar, there are other cases where somebody needed to have a continuation and Yibbum wasn't possible. So that soul will be used for a case where Yibbum was performed and it wasn't necessary. There's no family relationship there at all. So it's not as if this is a necessary condition for rectifying that soul. It's just the ideal way to take care of it, yeah.
Is Yibbum the only way in which reincarnation happens? Because
No.
the Ramchal seems to make it seem like this is going on most of the time.
Yeah, no. It certainly is not. It's going on in our generations. It's the norm. It's just that this is a special case. I mean, in a way, by implication, I said that. Although, what happens when you have children and there's no Yibbum? So I said, why isn't there Yibbum? After all, he died now, and his soul left the world, was going to be with his soul. Why don't you have to produce another vehicle for his soul? Answer, because his soul or parts of his soul go over to his children. So they go on in the world. That's what reincarnation is. Reincarnation is where a soul goes on in the world in a different vehicle. You had a question?
Kind of was answered, but just to clarify, like a Yibbum would be like your reincarnation is going to be within your own family tree, I guess.
Something like that.
And if you didn't have a Yibbum or you passed away some other way, your body could, or your soul could theoretically be placed anywhere else.
Correct. It is something like that. Yeah, that's yeah.
My question is, if the man impregnates a woman and then he dies, like they're married and everything, does Yibbum need to be done?
No. No.
And
So if there's
would his soul come reincarnated in that vessel? Or?
It would be carried the way it's carried by children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a feminine equivalent to Yibbum?
No. It's a whole story. What the role of women is vis-a-vis reincarnation. They have an entirely different position vis-a-vis reincarnation than men do. But it's too long. I mean, yeah. You have another question?
So if the woman's pregnant when her husband dies, she still has to do Yibbum?
No. That's what I just answered him. What you do is you wait and see whether she gives birth to a viable child. If she doesn't give birth to a viable child, then she will have to do Yibbum. But or she can get out of it with chalitza, but the Yibbum applies. Let's put it that way. But if she gives birth to a viable child, then no Yibbum takes place. Okay, now I gave you all the evidence, and then I said all of this can be explained with one word: reincarnation. I think the explanation is clear, precise, accurate. It's an integrated, satisfactory explanation. Is it forced on you? Is reincarnation forced on you? I can't say that. I can't say it's a real, a proof, but it's really pretty convincing, and it would be hard to have a single, smooth, explanatory interpretation if you don't take advantage of Yibbum. I'm saying this because Rav Gaon, in his Lemunas V'Deis, writes against Yibbum. He says it's not a Jewish idea. Now, Yibbum is part of the Zohar, part of the mystical tradition. There seems to be no evidence whatsoever that this part of the mystical tradition reached Rav Gaon, nor that it reached Maimonides. What's fascinating to me is that Maimonides never mentions it, neither pro nor con. Now, Maimonides mentioned lots and lots of subjects, and he wrote the Guide of the Perplexed, which is comprehensive, and he wrote other works that are comprehensive, and he wrote essays of various kinds. Nowhere does he mention it pro or con. The fact that Rav Gaon explicitly comes out against it, and the Rambam doesn't second him, to me is suggestive. I can't prove anything, but it's very suggestive. To me, it's uncharacteristic that the Rambam would simply pass over in silence such a major idea, especially since a predecessor of his outstanding predecessor mentions it and rejects it, and he wouldn't take sides on it, to me needs a good explanation. I don't know of a good explanation. Yeah.
What was the argument against?
He just said that we have no Jewish sources for it. And that means that there were no explicit sources because he was not privy to the Zohar. Zohar was not published in his time. Zohar was published 400 years later.
But isn't it
It's in the Torah. What does he mean?
Well, it isn't really. It's the word name, and you have to put together two and two, and then I think you can get to the idea that the child takes the place of, but takes the place of doesn't say word for word he gets the same soul.
He was against reincarnation, against the concept of Yibbum in general.
No, Yibbum is Yibbum was a mitzvah. He was a mitzvah.
Okay.
Yibbum doesn't say anything about. We are understanding its import as reincarnation.
Okay.
So what we built in terms of pshat, in terms of the literal reading of the passages, is the one who takes the name stands in for the identity of the deceased. That you can't avoid. Does that mean he gets the same soul? I could not force someone to admit, yes, he gets the same soul. We who have the Zohar tradition as well, to us it's just obvious that that's what's being discussed here. And the Raman, who had all of that, writes this in concrete terms, that that's what's going on in all these passages. But as I say, the Rasag is not refuted by what we said, because it's not explicit anywhere, and it would just be nice to hear someone like him explain how does he stand in the place of the father without having the soul? What does it mean to stand in the place of the father? That the girls do stand in the place of the father. I mean, what would that constitute? Saying reincarnation makes it clear, precise, and explanatory. Okay, when anybody says that it's an utterly foreign idea, it's borrowed from India and so forth and so on, these passages certainly make it clear that it's not utterly foreign. And all the shell, all the casing of it is here, and we're just filling the casing with the right content.